Welcome everyone. Tonight's planning commission meeting. We will begin with commissioners' reports. Michael.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, given the holiday break, I don't really have any detailed sort of progress from what was previously reported, but I was going to touch on the two sort of large housing projects that UVA's undertaken, both at Darden and at the Emmett Ivy corridor, where, if you pass by on 250 for the Darden one, or if you go by on Ivy Road, you can start to see sort of the extents of both those projects, more so at Darden, where you start to see the massing kind of coming to completion. But then along Ivy, they've come out of the ground, so they're no longer subgrade. And so if you want to get a sense of where sort of the limits are relative to the public realm, it's becoming clearer each passing week. And as they transition up and rise up, you'll see a lot of progress this spring. Hopefully they'll top out and again, sort of approaching summertime. So.
Thank you.
I was just at tree commission meeting a week ago, and they are preparing their state of the forest report to go before council, I think in April, so there's a lot of work to put into that in terms of recommendations. And the one that would be most relevant to planning commission is this there's work on creating a sort of pamphlet packet for developers on best ways to keep or preserve existing trees rather than planting new trees, because they offer so much if we can keep them. So they've been working on suggestions and kind of images on to do that better. I don't think I had Parks and Rec, or it got canceled. I don't know, but I'm going Thursday, so I'll tell you more about that next time.
I don't have anything to report.
The Virginia General Stakeholder Work Group working on the building code met on January 5th and 6th. I was not able to attend, unfortunately, but I understand a submission was made based on my previous submission, allowing, mine was allowing 4-story single-stair residential. This was allowing 5- and 6-story single-stair residential with the same additional safety restrictions. The committee did not reach consensus, and it proceeds to the board for a vote.
Interesting.
Nothing to report.
Okay. From the Board of Architecture Review, the only large item was the apartment building at 7th and Delavan in the Fifeville neighborhood. And the BAR, I believe, denied that project. And I believe it has been, an appeal has been filed to council. So we will see that project again. We won't, but council will be looking at that project in the coming months. Neighbor development services. Do you guys have any reports, or we're going to go right into our tax abatement study?
Mr. Chair, I have a motion.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I move to accept the minutes as written.
Oh, yeah, we'll get rid of that now. Any seconds?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That passes. All right.
Oh,
Sorry, I thought you heard me.
okay. Commissioner Ziliates, Commissioner Harness,
What are you doing?
Commissioner Cart.
I don't know.
What are we doing?
Do you want to do the NDS report?
Oh,
Is there anything to report for? That's all right.
You were approving.
You were still getting ready. I'm sorry. We're jumping around a little bit. But yeah, so nothing from NDS? Or
Oh, NDS report. I don't have a
Okay.
report now.
all right. Well, how about the tax abatement study? Great.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Kelly Brown, Director of Neighborhood Development Services, and I'm just going to do a brief introduction on our tax abatement study. So I'd like to introduce you to Mike and Jeremy, who are here to present the tax abatement item. At a city council meeting on April 21st, 2025, council charged staff with conducting research and analysis to determine if an affordable housing tax abatement program could have a material impact to incentivize housing construction in Charlottesville. within the context of the high costs associated with housing construction. If such a program could have an impact, Council also asked staff to define an optimal tax abatement program structure that could improve housing construction financing and minimize administrative complexity. In June 2025, staff contracted with 3TP Ventures to lead and conduct this study, market analysis, and model building to test the potential impact of an affordable housing tax abatement on the feasibility of housing construction projects. The goal of this project, therefore, is to enable an informed recommendation to Council regarding a tax abatement program in Charlottesville. So 3TP has reached a point where they've prepared a final report and completed a feasibility model that they will present and demonstrate for Planning Commission this evening. This is not an action item, but rather an opportunity for commissioners to learn more about this research, ask questions, provide feedback and insight, and learn how this feasibility model can help with the policy and programmatic considerations related to an affordable housing tax abatement. So, here tonight to present their report and demonstrate the feasibility model are Mike Callahan and Jeremy Goldstein from 3TP Ventures.
Where shall we do this presentation?
You can do it in any of the microphones, and just so you can move the slides to the next slide. I'll just put the station slide on.
Perfect, all right. Well, just brief introductions. I'm Jeremy Goldstein, and I was primarily responsible for a lot of the quantitative analysis and work on that front. I'm joined by Mike Callahan as well.
Yep, hey everybody, Mike Callahan, Charlottesville resident actually. 3TP has an office on South Street, and I was an advisor on this project working with Jeremy.
So I'll be the one leading you through the presentation this evening. We can go ahead and get started. You should see here an outline of the kinds of things we want to talk about, mostly get you up to speed on what the reason for the study was, what our methods were, make sure we're all on the same page about what tax abatements are, show you a little bit about this tool that we built and the findings therein, and then some of the key takeaways. So there's quite a lot that we want to talk about. If you can go ahead and go to the next slide. But perhaps the biggest takeaways are here in this next little bit, these sort of three main points. We'll talk about the numbers themselves later, but for the time being, let's talk about the bullets, which is number one, right now, looking at typical housing projects across the city, whether it be different housing types or in different submarkets. We're not seeing a lot of projects that can really pencil out, as they say right now. There's effectively limited development feasibility. You can go to the next slide, please. And the thing is, if we remove the inclusionary zoning from that math about the current realities of the market, while that does make some small improvements in feasibility, it still does not create a condition where like housing is easy to be built right now. So effectively, this is like the difficulties of the market. If you're hearing from local development community that it's difficult to make projects work right now, this data concurs with that. It also concurs with the fact that inclusionary zoning has a role to play, but is not the solitary reason why things aren't penciling today. Lastly, tax abatements can help in this process, but I think we should be looking at some sort of alternative mechanisms or other ways to make sure that we're really aligning some of the public sector concerns with, say, we don't want to overpay or over-subsidize, and the need to create more housing with this very real market dynamic of things not being able to pencil right now. So we may want to be thinking a little bit more flexibly about that. And while this study wasn't meant to provide a definitive solution to this problem, it is meant to help inform those kinds of decision-making processes as we move forward. All right, so now let's go ahead and get into the weeds. So we'll start with the study purpose. The overall purpose is summarized here in these bullets. We want to evaluate the market as it stands today. We want to evaluate the impacts of inclusionary zoning from a financial perspective. This is very much a financial evaluation. We're not going to talk a lot about administration or some of the other very real burdens to making projects actually happen. Right now, we're still mostly talking about the math, but we'll venture a little bit into some of these other issues. We want to talk about the financial or fiscal benefits of tax abatements in a couple of different realms, and then the other task was to provide a mechanism for the continued monitoring, updating, evaluation of impacts and findings. So we don't want to leave you with a static picture of the market today when the market can change tomorrow. I want to give you something that allows you to continue to monitor over time. Next slide, please. So there's a couple things that this project does and some things that it doesn't, and especially sort of the tool, which in some ways is really like the leave behind portion of this project, what that tool is and what it isn't. More than anything else, it is a means to inform policy decisions. And you can see those lines are sort of in bold, and you almost want to say inform, I wish is like double bold. It is not giving you the policy decisions, it is helping to inform. Just like the more that private sector math is understood by those making public sector decisions, I think the better off we're all going to be, and that's really what this thing is about. We wanted to provide you with a method that is transparent, flexible, and adaptable. In other words, it's something that you can come back to again. You can feel very clear about where the data comes from, and you can be making changes to it over time as better information comes along. We don't want to act like we have all the answers. We want to give you the means to make those adjustments as we move forward. And lastly, this was really meant to be a collaborative effort, which meant it wasn't just us doing this in some back room. It was done with a lot of conversation with city staff. It was done with a lot of conversation with the local development community. It was done with conversations with developers who aren't local, who can also provide outside context. We wanted to make sure that this was as inclusive as we could be in making sure that we were doing our best to understand and inform a pretty complicated housing market. This tool, though, is definitely not a handful of things. One, again, it's not meant to be the thing that determines the policy. There's a lot more to this than just the math. It's certainly not a way to provide staff, which will now have control over this tool moving forward, to sort of supersede what a private developer is saying about when they're looking at their math. This is really meant not so much to inform a specific project, but typical projects, the standard one. Every project is unique, and that's just something that has to be understood. And last, it's not a black box tool. It really is like all the assumptions and things built in can be adjusted and should be as we move forward. Okay, next slide, please. A little quick background and need, just so you know, this is one step in an ongoing thing that started several years ago with the identification of the need for more than 4,000 affordable housing units by in the next 20 years, and then a zoning code that was adopted that was meant in some ways to address this. It's also included inclusionary housing alongside a real financial attempt to provide some financial backing to that, and then sort of almost immediately noticing that market rate projects with affordable units haven't really come to fruition. So the city wanted to know, well, can we learn more about that, and what can we do as it relates to tax abatements, which is something that has been brought up on several occasions. How valuable an option is that to improve the outcomes of housing construction? So then our goal then ultimately is, let's build this tool, let's build this model that can help inform this sort of multivariate set of interests. Next slide. Just making sure we're sort of on the same page about when we talk about tax abatements. We'll get a little bit more in the weeds on this, but overall, really what we're talking about is some kind of reduction in taxes as a result of meeting the needs of that abatement policy, whatever the policy would be, with the intent to improve the financial feasibility of projects that have affordable dwelling units in them. You can see it was authorized under this particular act, and it's really what really happens is that it's a grant in which you refund after the fact. So someone pays their taxes, then you reimburse them after the fact. Some of that sort of stuff. Just to know. So we do have to sort of operate within the bounds of the state law. Next slide. Oh, and you can always skip those. Those are just the headers. So like an overview of the method. Sort of effectively a three-step process. One, again, collaboratively, determine typical costs and revenues. And we'll talk a good bit about that and can get into as much detail as anybody wants. Two, build a development feasibility tool that mirrors the private sector analysis process. Fancy way of just saying, let's build a pro forma tool. But let's add into that tool the means to analyze the impacts of public interventions. And you can sort of see, this is a screenshot of a portion of the user interface tab of this tool, where you can see that there's a section for project inputs and then a section for policy testing, so that you can say, under this sort of situation, how do things pencil? What's the yield? What's the IRR? What if we add this policy? How does that change the yield? That's effectively what this thing is doing. So it's calculating current feasibility of the typical project, and then how does that change under these under a range of interventions. Our primary issue was tax abatement, but as you'll see, we tried to go a little bit further with this work because it was a good opportunity to do so. Next slide. So why a tool? Hopefully this is sort of fairly clear to all of you already, but part of it is just that you need to have something like a tool that can change with changing market conditions. This is not the first time someone has tried to evaluate the fiscal feasibility of the housing market, but I think if you've been here for some of these previous plans that are, some that effectively, come as PDFs, it doesn't always take very long for the data and underpinnings to effectively have changed. And then it makes a lot of the findings therein, however solid the methodology was, not as relevant anymore. We just wanted to avoid that. We want to give you an opportunity to change with changing times. And then also allow you this opportunity to start playing with a wide range of interventions and sort of seed other things moving forward. Next slide, please. So the inputs into any pro forma tool, they can become incredibly complex, especially for a specific project where there's real money on the line and you need to go out and get financing from other people, which is very often the case when you're doing more than, enough units to trigger the affordable dwelling unit requirement. But on the whole, the basics are that you need costs and revenues, effectively is what goes into that. There's just a wide range of costs. There's different ways you can calculate revenues, and there's another handful of sort of financial assumptions that go into all of this stuff. The thing is, these things can be really unique to any individual project, and they change with regularity. The cost of wood changes quickly, the cost of steel changes quickly, sometimes consultant fees change quickly, time changes quickly. And so nothing that we're presenting today, especially as we start to show you, here's our estimate for the per unit cost of a wood stick-built low-rise. I don't want anybody to get too terribly focused on that, because ultimately what we're really trying to do is, one, at least get in the right range of overall financial viability and have that, and we've had that vetted, with people in and outside of this room. So we feel pretty comfortable, at least with the order of magnitude about this. But what we really want to care about is this gives us an opportunity to make some apples to apples comparisons. If this was what was the financial feasibility of this project, well, here's how it would change if we added this other stuff. And it's really the change, I think, that matters most. But saying all that, we do want to show you some of the inputs and let you know what's in here. Go ahead and change the slide. One of the biggest ones, of course, is hard costs. It really just comes down to sort of, labor and materials. The way that we wanted to do that was to try and mirror real projects that already exist in the city, so we're not like kind of making up too much of silly projects, but we wanted to we were asked to evaluate a range of housing options from single family to high rise, but I do want to note specifically not student housing. So that's not in here. And if there are questions about student housing, that would have to be kind of like an ancillary thing. But the model is in place to begin to, we've gone a good way on that. It's just not part of this study. But I do want to make clear that we started with an outside cost estimating software, asking it to price out projects like the ones that already exist in the city of projects, with these sorts of styles that you can see somebody, put together. And then that was vetted with local and outside developers, based on their project experiences. And then we made changes as a result. We took real world examples into consideration, and they were effectively always included into our numbers. They didn't necessarily replace things, but they were always included as part of that finding. So the next slide just shows something like here effectively the hard costs per unit for these different types of units. Again, these can change over time. One person's number will not be the same as another person's, and we're fine with that. And there's nothing about this model now that doesn't allow somebody to say, oh, you know what, townhouse these days it's $450. Oh no, it's $325 because they've gotten smaller. Fine, you can plug it in. But that's sort of the base of those numbers. You can go on to the next slide. Land costs is another one of the important components. Now, I should note here that getting accurate land, like price for land right now, has been very difficult for several reasons, but primarily which there just haven't been a ton of land sales. So what we really started with instead was assessed land values. We did go back and look at the small handful of land sales that there have been in the city, especially over the last few years. And there did, for what it's worth, there did seem to be some pretty solid alignment between sort of 2023, 2024 land sales, of which there were at least a few more, and the assessed land values. So it's not a bad place to start from, but it's also, these can change pretty wildly over time. But what we really wanted to do with these was to effectively create tiers of like sub-markets. Because the prices in one part of town are not the same as the prices in another part of town. Even if the construction materials cost the same, the land isn't the same. And so we wanted to use this sort of tiering system. But it really just means from tier 1 to tier 5, as you'll see in these charts moving forward. It really relates just to from sort of the most expensive assessed areas to the least. This map is showing, is a map of the assessed land value per acre, and it won't surprise you to see sort of the darker colors indicate higher prices or higher assessed land values. But we did not want to go ahead and say that there's, say, let's say a downtown submarket. For now, that's high priced, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the future, nor is it the case that there might be projects outside of downtown that would get downtown type prices even if they don't show up on this map as such. So instead of these tiers being submarkets in the way maybe you're used to them being, like Fifeville, we'll call it a neighborhood, that's not what this is. It is effectively a place that has the land costs and then commensurate rents associated with the types of places that currently fall under this sort of tier 1, the highest, or the tier 5, the lowest, or any in between. I know it's a little can be a little confusing. I apologize if I didn't explain it well, but hopefully you get a sense of what we were trying to do here. You can go to the next slide, and you can see now when we vetted this with local community, there was no real consensus. While we were able to sort of reach a reasonable consensus on construction costs, there just wasn't a real consensus on land costs. I expect these numbers are very likely to change over time. And it's even the case that for some folks who run pro formas, this is an input to see how it changes yield. For others, it's in fact like the land cost itself actually relates to meeting a bottom line first, and then whatever money is left over becomes the land cost. So there's not even like consensus on how to price all these things. So just be aware. I wouldn't fight anybody about changing a single one of these numbers. I'd be fine with it. You can go to the next slide. In some ways, that's true with soft costs too, which mostly just have to do with fees, whether they go to the city for reviewing things, or to like the consultants for drafting plans or doing legal and that kind of stuff. The one thing I want to note about this, you can actually already sort of move forward from this slide. The only thing I want to note here is that the model ties soft costs to time. So if you were to discover over time that it is taking longer to get stuff done, that's a material soft cost. That's real, and we want the model to account for that. Conversely, if there's situations in which things can go faster, that could theoretically have a benefit to cost, though we set at least a minimum threshold. There's no maximum. It could just keep going up and up and up and up, but we did set a minimum. Like at some point, there's only so many savings from that. We didn't want to overemphasize, say, oh, you've got this great new expedited review. It's saving you millions. Like, no, it's not. You still have to draft the plans. So lastly, then, there's revenues and some other sort of financials. But most of what we did was we pulled rents for that, apartments.com on projects that we felt were representative of tiers 1 through 5 for each of these kinds of building costs to the extent that we could find them. We didn't necessarily find a robust number of comps all across our 5 tiers and 6 building types, but enough to at least give us some reasonable numbers to start from. So that's our market rate rents, and then affordable rents are just based on area-wide median income, a proportion of that number. So that's just, that changes every year, but that's a static number. And there's some other stuff in this model, all of which can have substantive changes on outcomes, and they were all vetted with at least some portion of the group. No, everything was looked at by at least somebody else besides us. But again, all can be modified as we need to. All right. I think that's the last of of just the background. Now let's go ahead and get into the tool itself. So this tool provides 2 critical standards for pro forma outputs, yield on cost and IRR. Are folks familiar with both of those, or did any definitions needed? Happy to do it. It's just very quickly, just so you know.
For the public, please.
Yep. Okay, so for yield on cost, that is really focused on how much you're effectively getting as a return once a project is stabilized. So it cares about your net operating income relative to the project costs. That's its role. So it's in some ways a very simple kind of calculation, but is after, it doesn't care about time. The thing is, time matters tremendously in a lot of these projects. So it's nice to know that you've got sort of a stabilized yield once everything is up and running and you've got rents. By the way, I should have mentioned, these are all for rentals. This tool is just looking at rentals. So once you've got a stabilized project, it's interesting to know how much money you're generating every month. But the other side cares about time too, and when did you have to buy the land? How long did it take to get things running? When did you start getting rents? And the way that you would look at that is with internal rate of return, which is almost like inscrutable calculation that you just put into Excel and it gives you a number. Like the actual math it's like a goal-seeking thing that it's trying to do to get to a net present value of 0. So mostly you just say, just let the machine tell you what what IRR is. But they both have sort of, generally standard thresholds for what counts as feasible or not feasible. And that's what we really care about, are those thresholds. And so we built that into this model, along with a couple of other types of measurables that I think might yield a little bit more information for public sector folks besides just the private sector finances, and we'll show you that in a little bit. But again, what we really care about is the difference in these performance metrics with and without policy interventions. That's really what matters. So it doesn't matter so much that this one's a 5.2. What matters is that with this addition, it becomes a 5.7, and that gap of 0.5% is the thing that is effectively the thing that matters. All right, next slide, please. This is just a little screenshot of the tool interface. We'll I think have an opportunity to play with it if people are interested. But mostly what this thing is doing is it's giving users an opportunity to make selections about the development type in the submarket, how many affordable units you're supposed to have at various AMI bands if you want, what kind of policies do you want to test, and then on the right, that's all sort of on the left and in the sort of dark yellow. And then on the right are the overall findings of yields and IRR with and without the policy changes, what the difference is, and then some additional other summaries of the costs and benefits of these incentives. And we'll show you some of the findings from at least one example so you can see kind of the relative impacts.
So just on this one, just a quick orientation. So it looks like the deep mustard color, that's sort of guiding the user. These are must fill out sort of cells.
Yeah.
And I guess where we're seeing the green and the red is pretty obvious, intuitive, that this is where you trigger into possible, and then this is where you're probably not
That's
likely.
right.
The red's not likely. Okay,
That's right.
Thank you.
Next slide. Okay, great. So, sorry, it looked like maybe, okay. So let's go ahead and now get into some of the findings from feasibility with these key questions in mind. What is the feasibility of a typical project? What has the inclusionary zoning policy done to affect feasibility? How would incentives, tax abatements or others, impact feasibility? And lastly, how are city revenues affected by the use of these incentives? And let's show you what we found. So step number one, we just looked at current condition market feasibility, which as noted includes the inclusionary zoning. So these again are the sort of the typical findings. As mentioned before, it was like, red seems bad, green would be good. This is missing, I'm sorry to say this is what happens when I submit something a week ahead of time, is only in the 11th hour do I realize I missed to adding a key, where green is, green means effectively you've reached kind of the standard threshold for something to be likely developable. Yellow, which we kept as actually kind of a wide band, is to say, look, there's a chance that under the right sort of conditions, projects of this type have a chance of getting built. And then red was like, well, boy, these look pretty tough. And effectively what we're seeing is that as of now, new construction financial feasibility looks pretty limited. And that the only thing that maybe seems to be penciling out, or has the chance of penciling under just the right conditions, especially if they're under the right revenue conditions, would be a high-rise building that has really good rents. And you perhaps can fill in the gaps about what kinds of projects might meet that criteria today. But lots of reds. And this has nothing to do, a lot of this is out of Charlottesville's hands. But what if we removed inclusionary zoning? What if that had never existed? How would that change financial viability? How big a deal is inclusionary zoning on its own? And that's the next slide. Well, effectively what we found is, it's not a sea change. It's not like everything turned green. But you see a little bit of improvement, maybe even in some other kinds of products. But in general, yields tend to increase by about 50 basis points, IRR increasing maybe 2%. It's still pretty difficult, though, for stuff to pencil out. And it does suggest a need for, right now, if you want things to get built, that there's space to provide incentives or interventions to make projects pencil. All right, next slide. So now we get to tax abatement. We want to talk about two different kinds of approaches today. One is what is generally what people talk about for tax abatement. The standard is a value-based abatement, but we also want to I expect, introduce folks to a rent gap abatement, which I think was originally brought to us through someone from Livable Seville. Is that correct? Yeah, so part of the feedback, the feedback loop in all of this work when we presented this to Cadre, presented it to the HAC, solicited feedback from folks across city staff. That was one of the things that came to us was, hey, take a look at this, at something that Baltimore is doing, and we'll show you a little bit about that. But just so you know, so that the value-based abatement is effectively, the abatement is on the improvement value associated with that project, i.e. the building. So it doesn't care about, land price, the land cost stays the same and the tax-related land stays the same, but what gets abated is the building itself, the tax on the building itself. A rent gap abatement, very different. It is really focused on the difference between market rate rents, what that unit would have rented for if it was offered to the market, and the rent that is mandated as affordable. Right, so it is an abatement of the gap between those two numbers. All right, so those are the two things we want to show you. I think the next slide is going to be a summary. Yes, it's a summary table of of running the model on an example, a mid-rise project in a tier 3 area, so the kind of the average prices, average rents, average land costs. That it was subject to inclusionary zoning and then gets an abatement. The rows are different levels of abatement. And as you can see, if you look in the first sort of two columns, or columns 2 and 3, I should say, that you can see that as you add abatement, increasing the abatement amount, you improve the yields and you improve IRR. But I also want to note the next two columns, which is maybe another way to evaluate for the efficacy of this sort of work. If you've mandated that a unit has to be offered to someone at an affordable rate, there is an effective loss in income or in revenue associated with that requirement. And under this particular project, that amounts to $13,000 a month. The abatement return associated with each of these abatement percentages, you can see doesn't get anywhere close to $13,000, right? Full 100% abatement on all the improved value, great. There's still an effective gap between what the financial mandate of inclusionary zoning and this style of tax abatement. So that's another way to sort of evaluate how good is this program. Another way to look at this is, well, if we didn't have this abatement and somebody built this project, how much money are we effectively giving away? Because this is one of the things I think folks are concerned about. Are we just giving away money? Well, how much is that? In this case, this would amount to as much as $50,000 plus in tax revenue waived because of this tax abatement. Now, on the flip side of that, there are lots of times where in some ways what you're trying to do is provide an incentive that creates a unit that otherwise wouldn't have existed, a project that otherwise wouldn't have existed. So the other way to look at this is to say, well, how much new tax revenue do you actually still get as a result of this project existing, with the presumption that nothing would be there otherwise? And then you can see, well, you can get maybe as much as $530,000, maybe it drops down to $490,000, but it's still $490,000 of tax revenue that wouldn't have otherwise been there. Now, of course, there are costs associated with the people who live in this unit, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, it's important, I think, to think about this from multiple scales. What are just the basic financials from the private sector side, which is something you should know about, but doesn't necessarily need to be the only reason that you make a decision. How much are you really giving them relative to what's being lost? And how much are you giving away relative to what you might be getting back in return? So multiple ways of thinking about this. And this is the way in which we hope that this sort of information sort of informs a decision. But let's go ahead and go to the next slide and show the version with that rent gap, where the abatement is tied to the gap. So let's say we've said an average rent is $2,500 a month, and we're saying that the affordable rent here is about $1,500 or so a month. I don't remember, I'm sorry, off the top of my head. And all of these things are built with there's a mix of studio to 3-bedroom units, et cetera, so this is just an average rent anyway. But Now we're abating that difference. So just by means of example, we're saying there's $1,000 a month difference, and we're going to abate somewhere up to that, just in these cases, up to that $1,000. And you can see the yield changes and IRR changes. And actually, do you mind going sort of back and forth between the previous one and this one? So you can see if you just sort of go back and forth and you're just looking at yield changes and IRR changes and keep going back and forth, that the version in rent gap is actually much higher. This is a much sort of stronger, has a much stronger financial impact. Okay, now we can just stay with rent gap. The other thing that this does is, at least if you did 100% abatement, the whole point of it is you're giving back the monthly loss. So it's $13,000 loss, it's a $13,000 abatement. That's the purpose. It doesn't have to be that number, but you can see you can reach that more easily under this sort of mechanism. Now, that of course means a much higher amount of revenue waived, and effectively lower new tax revenue. But again, it may well be that this sort of abatement may increase the probability of a project getting built because you've had a larger financial impact. Okay.
Can I ask a quick question
Absolutely.
on that last chart? I just want to make sure I understand everything correctly. So the second to last column, annual revenue wave, that's annual tax revenue that the city is waiving.
And that should have said annual tax revenue waived. Absolutely.
Got it.
Sorry, I didn't do that. No, that's exactly right. Yeah.
I have a question about, I guess, both of these. In terms of the cost to the city of the abatements of either form, is this looking at the first year the project is built? I think we're doing a 99-year IZ requirement, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So is this sort of averaged over 99 years, the first few years? What time frame are we talking about?
This would be over the time of the abatement.
So
which
100
itself could be, well, no, you could have an inclusionary zoning requirement for 99 years and have a tax abatement for 6 months. That'd be up to you. This is part of the policy.
So what's modeled here?
This is basically what would happen for the course of the year.
Okay,
Yeah.
so those costs would presumably, the gap narrows every year, you might assume. So this,
It might.
the numbers might depend heavily on the duration of the abatement, is that correct?
It would depend on the duration of the abatement. It would depend on which of these methods you use. One that is more focused on the existing market rate prices of that particular project would certainly have changes in the gap year over year.
And is that,
yeah.
is the duration of the abatement a parameter in
Yes.
the tool? Okay, great.
Yes. Yeah, it's not doing it, it's not really, ultimately at this stage, it's the last thing to tweak. It's not doing a lot of kind of net present value changes right now, and the tool itself, the way in which that would sort of manifest itself is in, like downstream effects in the model, maybe too much detail, but it's really it's only looking at 30 years. And if you wanted to build it to look at 100 years, then you would see more robust. So it kind of gets, there's a cap on it as it stands for right now. But all those things can be changed over time. Yeah. I mean, at some stage, we were really just looking kind of at a macro scale, how valuable is this sort of thing, more than really trying to get down to say, how long should we be doing this for as of now. All right, so I think we can move on to the next sets of slides. So this is just a little bit of some pros and cons on these two. The number one pro for the value-based abatement, it's that's the standard. It's the industry standard. It's the one that's tried and true. That's what you see all over the place. But there are a couple of cons associated with it. It doesn't fully close a market gap. And I think this is going to be a little this is not a technical finding. This is a little. One could sort of think through this a little bit logically, that the best opportunity is to use an abate that kind of abatement doesn't look like it's very often going to make a project pencil when it otherwise wouldn't. And as such, it may be the kind of thing that's particularly useful in really good market conditions, but it doesn't make a huge difference in bad market conditions. It doesn't. It doesn't mean it's still not beneficial, and I'm sure there are projects that would be able to that would pencil that otherwise wouldn't. So this is just sort of probabilistically. It may not address some of these, getting us to the finish line in tough times. A rent gap abatement, the pros really are that because it's tied to market conditions, it really is addressing the financial loss that is associated with inclusionary zoning. This is, a person could reasonably say this is an unfunded mandate, and doing something that's focused on addressing that unfunded mandate, this is probably the best way to do that. And because it's more robust, it might be more beneficial in a wider range of economic times. And so that's good. The number one con, it's rarely used. We found this Baltimore example. Our project wasn't to do a deep dive into the Baltimore version, so this is mostly just trying to get information from them. And they were like, well, we just sort of started it, and we don't have a lot of results yet, because they're dealing with the same macro level housing conditions that Charlottesville is. So there's probably some number of administrative hurdles that would exist. I wouldn't say like gung ho, let's do this, but it is sort of intriguing. But there are things that still have to be figured out. And it still has the same, like if it's a very strong market, is it, how would you know if it's needed? All right, so we can go on to the sort of wrap up thing. Oh, sorry. Well, I mean, technically not in our scope, so we didn't go very far down this path. It was easy enough to sort of program into the tool a couple of other standard kinds of incentives for housing feasibility. So we built those into the model. That includes gap financing and land provision, reduced development review timeline, so a reduced timeline to get things to market, and forgivable loans. They're sitting there ready to be used. We've got a couple of examples so you can see, they also have demonstrable improvements on IRR. And so it's not surprising that you'll hear that there are other places that use multiple incentives at once to make something happen, and this is part of why there's no single one that's the silver bullet, but some of these can be sort of layered on top of each other, and the model allows for that. You could turn on two policies at the same time and see what happens. So that's there too. It's just it hasn't been done in as a robust a manner as some of the other parts. Okay, with that, I think I'm on to the key findings slide. Thank you, by the way, for giving me so much time to talk about this. I hope it's been helpful. But here are the key findings. One, market conditions are challenging right now. It's just the case. And inclusionary zoning adds a financial burden to that challenge. It just does. Traditional tax abatements can help. There's no question. It's a net positive. But they would look today to be insufficient on their own. I don't think you could make a reasonable recommendation that this is a thing that needs to happen today to solve your problem. But you could recommend it today because it can be part of solving problems. The next note is that it may be worth learning a little bit more about this rent gap tax abatement model, sort of vetting it, like with those who would have to do it. What are the things that we need to be thinking about as far as are we missing anything about how this would really work? Are there other kinds of administrative challenges that we would need to face? Because it does look like it might be a better balance between some of these public and private priorities. It really does help make market dynamics sort of the crux of what it is that we're trying to all work towards. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Saying all that, there may be other incentives and policies that would be needed to make this work. And lastly, for the purposes of future exploration, future adaptation, this leave behind tool, I hope is a mechanism to keep this part of the conversation beyond just the submission of our report later this year. I think that's it. Thank you for the time. There is, I think the final slide just has our contact information for me and Mike. It's just our first names at 3TP Ventures. Happy to take any questions.
Is there going to be a live demo of the tool, or I wasn't sure if that was part
You want a live demo? We'll do it.
I was curious.
Sure.
One of the questions I had, and again, I didn't have a chance to spend time with the tool, but do you take into account sort of completion time is escalation built into the tool? It is, okay. So you can sort of modify when it would open up.
That's right.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, here it is. This looks like the live version. But there were other questions. Sure. Go ahead.
I have a few. I've been making a pile. Thank you. This is exciting. Accessibility issue: red-green blindness.
Thanks.
Please.
Can do.
Developers often will, when they're crying to me, will talk about the hurdle rate for a loan. That a hurdle rate that you can't just pencil. You have to make enough profit that the bank gets big feelings and make them happy. Did you consider that?
Well, I would hope that honestly, I don't know if we really did. All we really set was that if you reached a particular yield, that might mean that it is likely to be feasible. That's really the full extent, but it may well be that this hurdle rate needs to be something that would be ultimately included in any other version of this. But at some point, again, this is Our interests on, I think on the public sector side are a little bit more, what are the tools we have available to us to affect positive change? And that ain't one of them. You know, talking to the bank isn't one of them, and so it's a little bit more like, well, here are the impacts of the tools that we have, and is this, you know, is this worth the squeeze? Is this juice worth the squeeze?
In order to get an effective desired yield, did you base that all on the current interest rates? Like, did you use a spread over current interest rates, or did you say everyone wants to get to
No, and I'd be happy, and that's an easy thing to change. For right now, it really is just like, it's just like the sort of red, yellow, green, like, oh, it's a 7, and right now that sounds like, that's probably like, you know, projects like that would be likely to pencil. But again, it's not, you know, it's not your particular project, right? It's sort of a typical.
Commissioner has a good point. I don't think hurdle rate's the right term for debt, but there's certain spreads that developers and lenders will look at in order to start a project. And so that has to be moving with interest rates.
Okay.
Because I think you and I talked about 3 years ago, something at a 5 3/4 might have
That's right.
penciled out, and now it has to pencil out at like a 7 or 6 3/4. So, which is why time makes a huge difference.
That's right, yeah,
If you delay us a year and interest rates move in the wrong direction, that's right. Okay, sorry.
I would love to have a local person with in-depth knowledge provide some information about that to me at some point. I won't volunteer anybody, but just making a note for the record.
For about, 5 years. For about 5 years, the city of Charlottesville has been trying to get permission from Richmond to do a split rate tax, to tax land at a lower amount than buildings. Can I see if we can get back? Land at a higher amount than buildings. There it is. With the hope that this could reduce the land acquisition costs, reduce holding costs, and improve the profitability of for-profit and nonprofit development. I'm guessing that is not in the model.
No, because it's right now, it's modeling your existing condition, but if you wanted to change it, then it would, it would just be a field that would get changed, no problem.
Those are all my questions. Thank you.
I want to say, first of all, I really appreciate this tool. I think it's not necessarily the point of the study, but having this accessible can really help some people that may not understand how these work and be able to build themselves a model this way can really get in here. I haven't yet played around with myself, but just looking at sort of the input screen here, it appears to be relatively straightforward, so I just want to appreciate that.
Thanks.
My comment more is about, you talked about this a few times, that it's about the delta between with and without. That's really what matters. In some of your matrices, I'm curious to know what project return on cost or IRR did you pick for those tables that sort of showed the results? Like I have that you were showing a 0.5% yield on cost improvement and 2% IRR improvement. And I think knowing the base yield or the base IRR is important, because a change at a 5% IRR is going to be smaller than the exact same monetary change at a 10% IRR. So I'm just curious to know what the results of the project were when you started playing around with these abatements.
Oh, well, so we ran that same sort of table on lots of different scenarios, and it sort of can all be automated to do so. And really, that was just kind of like a generic kind of finding. Sometimes it was, it would go as high as 0.5%. And it wouldn't always go to 0.5%. I think that in some ways depends on the inputs of the project type. But that's, effectively that's all in here. You wanted to try and test the viability of a particular style, then you would be able to get a sense of that, a little more of that particular project type. And for what it's worth, there's really nothing to prevent you from making specific changes even away from the typical. So you can see here in the mid-rise tier 1 project, we're assuming it's 135 units with above ground parking and 3 spaces for every 4 units. But you could go ahead and change those if you wanted to. You would just have to go and hit reset the default at some point to make it go back to the original typical. So you can try and mirror some sort of real life project if you want, but it'll never be as robust as the versions that other folks are doing.
So I'm hearing you say that some of those results slides that you showed isn't necessarily specific to a project, but is sort of a median or an
amalgam.
average
You got it.
compared to
That's right.
the many projects that you looked at?
That's right, yeah.
All right, thank you. And then last one is, when you talk to local developers about this,
Mm-hmm.
did they give you a delta that they're looking for
No,
that would help?
no.
Okay,
But also, it wasn't asked.
Okay.
I mean, I hope we were upfront with folks about what it is we were looking for. We were looking to try and make this thing as reasonable as we could, so that it can help inform decisions moving forward, as opposed to this being the thing that's like some part of a negotiation that's happening right now to decide on a number. So that kind of question wouldn't even necessarily come up, or that kind of answer wouldn't have come up in the kinds of questions we were asking.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, 10 or 12 or something like that. And it can change.
Does that, Commissioner, I agree with, so the exit assumed that no real estate, the abatement lasted all the way
To the end of
exit,
it.
and then you exit.
Mhm.
Okay, you have to pick an exit price.
Yep. Mhm.
Did you
Did.
factor in that the next buyer doesn't have the real estate tax abatement, so their NOI is not going to be as good, so they might not pay the same amount?
No, it didn't. It didn't. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good example of some sort of like the real world issues here that I think are always going to be kind of project specific. Because truth be told, the chances that I'm exactly right about what the rents were for this project in year 11 are like zero, right? I mean, so all of them are just kind of assumptions. And under this sort of modeled environment, what is it that we find?
But did you grow rent every year and other OpEx every year, but kept real estate taxes?
The real estate taxes are related to, the only time we care, the real estate taxes are related to the assessed value of the property. So they should be rising every year.
I thought you were getting a full abatement, so they should be zero.
Oh, well, yeah, sure, but, so it comes up with the assessed value, so that if it wants to be sold at any given month, it can be. But then it removes whatever the amount of the abatement is, that's required, yeah.
Because the benefit of this is.
Jeff, if this is going to continue, I mean, could you actually just come to the microphone so at least everyone can get the benefit of your questions? I'm not really, there wasn't scheduled for this.
I can shut up.
But if it's, well, I mean, it seems like it's useful information, but I also feel like it's, anybody listening in is going to have no idea what's going on. Probably doing something that I'm not supposed to, but it's,
Hi, Jeff Levine.
I know you were part of this process. So.
600 West Main Street. Okay, so we were talking about, in an assumption to get an IRR, you have to assume some exit date, whatever that is. So you picked a date like 10 years, and through that, the real estate taxes were zero, I guess, right? Because you had a full abatement?
Well, they were
I know
related
I'm
on
putting you on the spot, but-
whatever you actually put in for the abatement. You can set the abatement, you can turn it on or off and then set the percentage.
Right, but you were showing how the abatement doesn't help that much necessarily in getting that different yield up, but I'd like to look, because what happens is real estate taxes are like 33% of our OpEx or something.
Okay.
So if that stays at zero and doesn't grow, and we can control other OpEx and grow our rent, then maybe that gap is, you said you didn't use net present values, for example. So I think we have, and it also goes to IRR, like if you can exit in 5 years, there's just a lot of variables other
Absolutely.
than just the going in yield on cost, and also how you can go over time and get the benefit of the real estate tax abatement versus maybe 2, 3, 4 years, and also how the burning off of it kind of decreases value. It also seems, you also did net present value that when it burns off and the city gets the real estate taxes for, let's say, the 20 years, and you net present value that versus the real estate taxes on that piece of property today, my economics have shown sometimes it's like an 8 to 10x of what they get today. Like they get 40 grand, and over the time they would get 400 grand. So that would be a good thing to factor. And also I would really change your naming of it, because I don't think the city's giving anything up. I think it's a city investment in its infrastructure, just like a bridge or anything else. I think that this is a place for cities to make investments because of housing shortage and the other economic benefits that kind of flare out from housing. So the giving, I think, paints it in like, developers are out here like, give me something. I think it's really just the city invests right now in affordable housing, and the city invests a lot of different ways in city infrastructure. This is just another way, so.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But I want to be respectful of the wide range of opinions about this, and that's in some ways why that is mentioned. I'd like there to be, if you look at this through a developer's lens, what does it tell you? If you look at it through a person who's skeptical about development's lens, what does it tell you? And as long as we're trying to go through it, the widest list we can of the ways in which this can be viewed, that helps them get to an outcome. I don't mind at all.
And I'm not debating, but I'm just,
Yeah.
you kept using giving, and I was sitting there and I was like, it's really, because I'm thinking about the philosophical part of this, and I'm thinking about people watching it, and I'm thinking about people going, why do these people need any, and I don't think it's a giving, I think it's an engine, it's an impetus, it's what cities do to drive the engine of the economy, and that's.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, and well said.
Any other planning commissioner questions or comments?
Well, I just, again, looking at the presentation, you started with the yield on cost with just the market feasibility. You just did the analysis saying like, guess what, it's hard to build right now. You did another one that you sort of took the same sampling and you said, if we removed inclusionary zoning, it kind of moves, but not in a fundamental way. Did you think about overlaying that same data set through the rent gap and through the other one, just a couple scenarios, just to sort of visually continue that thread? Saying that with these things, look at things turn green. I was just curious if that thread would be helpful. Granted, it's different once you actually look at real projects, but just to sort of give a case point to show those baseline and how it plays out.
I could imagine that being helpful as a visual aid, and only just in the sense that because these are all sort of typicals and rounded numbers, I wouldn't want to sort of overemphasize like, aha, doing this at this exact percentage is the solution to this problem that makes.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's like a matrix.
That's really kind of.
It's like 6 runs, and you show how you mess with it. Those things can start to shift, and there could be avenues if you really drill down on the numbers to change the landscape. So.
Yeah. No, I think there's plenty of evidence that these can change the landscape, especially if you are savvy enough to do things at the right time and take advantage of them in the right way. Yeah, and I think in some ways this tool will never be able to capture all of that stuff, nor really I think should it necessarily attempt to. I think in some ways it's good to know that there's merit in an abatement. It's not a cure-all. Those who want to take advantage of it, I bet can do great things with it and maybe make positive change.
And this last question I had was not about this tool or the study. This question for Kelly and NDS was, did the city, and again, this is very naive, but this is new construction, new rental construction. Has there been any precedent or exploration of tax incentivization around existing inventory, ways to create abatements to take existing stock, give owners a reason to maybe lower the rent and offer them at a lower rent?
No, we haven't considered any sort of policy in that vein. Did you have any examples of where that's been done elsewhere?
No, it's something I've just thought about. If there was a way to, I've seen other sort of tax abatements for other investments or other sort of, whether it's sustainable or stormwater or other things. I was just curious if there was a way to say, hey, if you shaved your rent down on your existing rental property, you would maybe pay less property tax or something. And again, I'm not sure. It's different because this is net new revenue that you're basically giving some back. This would be taking existing revenue and decreasing it, but it's the same type of investment that I think Jeff was talking about.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, for sure. The only thing that I'm familiar with is tax abatement programs or tax credit programs for making investments in the property, like rental rehab type credit programs, but nothing that would seek to reduce the rent. So it's an interesting concept, something we can think about.
I just think building is tough right now. So is there a way to sort of crack this nut looking at existing inventory?
Just occurred to me, it's often hard to work across silos, really in any organization. We have an economic development team here at the city. They're very good at problems like this. Have they looked at this?
Yes, they have. They've been involved in this. Chris Engel and his staff. And the tax assessor's office was involved in some of this, helped set cap rates and exit cap rates and some of the financial details. Yeah, lots of folks have been involved.
Got a question. I'm trying not to ask a policy question because I know you didn't look at policy or like what's the right policy. But I think and you didn't look at kind of the burden to administer an abatement program, but I do think that is something that we will probably want to consider and council will want to consider. But looking at the three example cities, and there's sort of like the two strategies, the traditional tax abatement, and then there's the rent gap abatement. Could you just kind of summarize how does a traditional abatement actually get operationalized? Like, I'm building a project, so does the city have to tell me here's the percent or of the future tax revenue that we will refund to you, and then is there something that has to happen every year in a city department to make sure that this is administered? And then similarly with rent gap, like is that a one and done calculation, or it happens every single year?
No, I think all those are done annually, and there's compliance components to all this stuff. I won't pretend that I'm an expert in the administration of this stuff for sure. So we're reaching the end of the things where I think I'm the number one choice for doing this stuff. But yeah, I mean it is certainly an ongoing administrative burden on both sides. I can at least tell you sort of anecdotally one of the things here. So as cool as it is to say, hey, we made you whole through this rent gap method, there are other costs besides just those that come up with the creation of the requirement of affordable housing that may not necessarily just be shown on a pro forma spreadsheet, that are the kinds of things that will come up if you wanted to go down this path. And some of them have obvious financial costs, and some have karmic costs to deal with, just the headache costs to deal with. But they're all real. Any additional component that you're putting on to folks who are just trying to, oftentimes just return the debt that they accrued by loaning the money from somebody else. Right? These are major projects. Every one of these examples are 7, 8, sometimes 9-figure projects. No one has that money. It's all loaned from someone else. And oftentimes the capital that you're raising does not care about the policy that you've put in place. It's looking for return, and then that the burden of getting to that return is on the developer, and that's just like a real hurdle they've got to deal with. And anything you're adding on to that probably has a additional cost beyond just the financial one.
Any other questions?
Can I do a quick one? I think I have two actually short ones. One, just so that I understand, you have in the matrix an entry for single-family homes, but IZ comes into play for 10 or more units?
That's right.
Is that talking about a cluster of 10 plus single-family homes, or what does that mean?
I think at this stage it's a kind of like a placeholder. Are there real world situations where you could have this be applied to single-family housing, or is this the portion that was assessing the market in general?
So the scope of study for the tax abatement study was really to look at where the city policy comes into play requiring affordable units, and that's at 10 plus units. So we did not look at the potential for tax abatement on those on infill projects.
That's my confusion, because there's a row in the output for that.
We still wanted to know the feasibility.
Okay, but it wouldn't really come into play.
It wouldn't really. I think in reality it would not come into play. These are sort of like
Okay, that makes sense. That's why I was confused. And then I think.
And maybe should be removed from that matrix. Truth be told, for that reason.
And then really quick, I think this is a question for staff. Just to sort of sanity check the modeling that you're doing and saying, okay, most land tiers and most topologies are not feasible to build right now. How many IZ units are in the pipeline under the new zoning ordinance as of now?
I think we have worked through review of 2 or 3 units.
Oh, units not developed, okay.
Yeah.
Not a lot, okay, so it is red indeed then.
Good sanity check.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I guess, yep, your turn.
Yeah, thank you. I decided it didn't make sense for me to sit back down again. So Kelly Brown, NDS Director again, and I'm here to present another presentation as kind of part of the NDS report on another study that we are getting ready to embark upon, looking at our affordable dwelling unit manual with a specific focus on the in lieu fee requirements for student housing and non-student housing. So I have a presentation to share that provides an overview of some background on the topic of student housing and what we're looking at in this study, a timeline, and really hoping that it can be an opportunity for Planning Commission to provide some feedback on the scope of work to really inform the study approach moving forward and desired outcomes. And we would be returning to you with updates once the study is underway. So again, what I'd like to try to share with you today is some background on student housing, some initial observations on areas of concern or questions for what we want from our policies for requirements of in lieu fees for student housing and non-student housing moving forward, what we have proposed as a scope of work for study, an approach to community engagement, some potential options, really one set of options that we may want to test through this study, and a timeline for that work. So go ahead, Patrick, you can keep moving. All right, so just by way of history of student housing here in Charlottesville, UVA enrollment growth has steadily increased and increased the demand for student housing. As many of you know, students historically really lived on grounds in a limited capacity, and then also in older apartment complexes near UVA. That includes in converted single-family homes and small apartment buildings. And what we're seeing recently as enrollment has grown and construction costs combined with feasibility of development has changed over time, private developers are now stepping in and building purpose-built student housing around grounds. Within walking distance to ground seems to be a really important consideration. Another key feature is the provision of 4-bedroom units allowing for rental by the bedroom. You can keep going, Patrick. So this is by no means a comprehensive market assessment of student housing or really a comprehensive assessment of supply and demand, but just some kind of high-level statistics to provide some foundation for understanding what the city is really facing in terms of need for student housing and how that's being met. So total undergraduate and graduate enrollment at UVA. One statistic I found online was 26,470 students. Unfortunately, I broke a cardinal rule and did not document my source when I put that on the slide. If you go on the UVA website and looks at their quick facts and figures, it puts it closer to 27,000 actually, 18,000 undergrad, 9,000 graduate. We're really kind of within that ballpark, hopefully, in terms of the statistics we can find online. 7,000 beds approximately are on grounds, 4,000 for first-year students. The 2030 plan that UVA is following really aspires to house all first-year and second-year students on grounds. There are 5 projects currently under construction off grounds that are looking to meet some additional need. This map here shows the locations. As I mentioned previously, they really are hugging close to that proximity to the university. But a total of a little over 3,500 additional beds. So there is still quite a bit of unmet demand, so to speak, for housing. Many students are still living in in residential neighborhoods and in the county as well. You can keep going. In terms of definitions of student housing in the development code, it is defined as projects that run by the bedroom within a half-mile of campus grounds. Some other things to understand about student housing. National reports note, again, as I mentioned previously, there is a trend, a desire for private bedrooms and bathrooms, high-end amenities, really to locate these near campus. If you can get commercial development on the ground floor, like you see there in that Jolly Roger and Greensboro example, I think that's commercial space, hard to tell. That's a great thing. And it is happening, that sort of development is happening here in Charlottesville, but around the country as well. Keep going. You've seen this slide before. Just by way of context, I did want to share that we are looking at the development code, at policies and regulations that were established when we adopted it in 2023, and seeing what's working, what's not. Hopefully we're going to get to the opportunity tonight for you to consider many Tier 1 and Tier 2 recommendations for development code changes. Tier 3 studies are really much broader in scope. You can keep going, actually, Patrick. Require a lot of engagement and thought for how the process should lay out, to look at key questions and develop recommendations. So looking at the Affordable Dwelling Unit Manual and this question of student housing actually really does represent a Tier 3 study that we have determined was appropriate to bring forward as a priority on our work plan, having housing now part of NDS, and also given a number of questions about our student housing policies as the new development code is looking to be implemented. Keep going. So just a little bit more background as well. As you all know, there are a lot of provisions in the development code for what intensity of development is located in different places. Housing is located. I'm sorry, is it permitted in all districts? Except for the industrial districts? So housing is permitted pretty much everywhere. There are a number of overlay districts that govern some special features and special requirements, such as our entrance corridors, our architectural design control districts. There is no specific overlay district for where student housing can and can't be built. It's just that a specific geography was established for where you need to require a different type of in lieu fee if you're not providing affordable dwelling units. So I think that's just important to understand, that it's not that we are permitting student housing in some places and not in others. It's actually permitted everywhere. And we need to make sure that we are not restricting different types of housing. It's just that we created this geography to govern how we are allowing for affordable, an in lieu fee payment for affordable housing. Keep going. And so these are the specifics on that policy, the affordable housing requirements, that is, for non-student housing, so residential development generally. Any project that provides more than 10 units is required to provide 10% of units at 60% of the AMI or less, or pay an in lieu fee. Bonus heights for units is permitted if you are providing those affordable units at 50% of the AMI, or you have to pay the same fee. For non-student housing, that in lieu fee is equal to the average total cost per unit of developing a residential unit in the Charlottesville market, based on a bedroom count up to 3 units. So basically the construction cost. For student housing, the requirement is different. Again, I described the definition of student housing. For student housing, actually no affordable units are required on site, but you may achieve bonus height and an in lieu fee is required. The in lieu fee for student housing is different. That is based on the difference between the value of a market rate unit and that of an affordable unit, which we have used the term value gap to describe that. Keep going. Yep.
I've heard this described as a ban on affordable housing within a half mile of the university. Is that accurate, or how would you distinguish it?
Well, so if it is student housing, then no on-site units, no affordable on-site units are to be built. If it's non-student housing, then the requirement applies. So it's not a ban per se, but if student housing is the more attractive option to be built, then yes, you're not going to see affordable units built in those locations. So in terms of a rationale for the, why do we have this approach? The rationale from when these requirements were established was that student housing projects simply do not typically include non-student housing. This is really because that student housing program is very unique. It's designed to offer rental by the bedroom for students. And there are obviously student preferences for what those living conditions and amenities look like. So you're just not going to see non-student housing included in a student housing project. And so because of that, it was deemed appropriate to not require on-site affordable units. And so because of that, and looking at different methods of calculating an in lieu fee, when you compare the construction cost approach to the value gap approach, and the value gap approach was found to be lower, that was determined to be a more appropriate requirement. Because if you're not requiring on-site affordable units, then how can you have a in lieu fee requirement that's as high as the in lieu fee requirement for non-student housing? Did that make any sense at all? Because it's hard to communicate.
I think
but essentially,
what you said makes sense. The philosophy, I'm not sure makes sense.
Yes, essentially a lower fee requirement was deemed appropriate given the lack of an on-site affordable unit requirement. So that was then, and of course this is where we are now, and we're trying to determine if that still makes sense or if we should consider some other approaches. You can keep going. In terms of that geography of where that requirement is applied, it was determined that that requirement for student housing within a half-mile radius of central grounds would be essentially defined by the location of north grounds and central grounds through our zoning map, where there is no zoning for those parcels, and then a half-mile radius outside of those boundaries. And so any project that comes forward in that area, if it is proposing student housing, there is no on-site requirement for affordable units, and the lower in lieu fee requirement kicks in. Keep going. So some initial observations and concerns, and I've alluded to some of them. Number one, there's an inconsistent in lieu fee payment actually structure for bonus height. So that's something that I just mentioned briefly, but if you are gaining bonus height, there is no requirement that you pay an additional amount in an in lieu fee to achieve that bonus height, despite the fact that if you were providing on-site units, they would have to be at the 50% AMI rather than the 60% AMI. In terms of just the student housing requirement specifically, the lack of requirement for an on-site unit really limits, as you were just pointing out, new affordable housing where student housing is the most financially feasible reinvestment option. Student housing has a lower per bedroom cost requirement for an in lieu fee, so that further incentivizes student housing. There's no consideration for conversions to non-student housing, no consideration for 4-bedroom units, which is what we're seeing the most of. And this geography that was established, that this policy applied within that half-mile radius, really starts to impact neighborhoods where displacement is a concern.
Can I, really quick?
Sure.
When you say no consideration for 4-bedroom units, what does that mean? There's no number in the chart. What does someone pay to build a 4-bedroom unit?
So right now, we simply don't have a metric that can be used. We have to use the 3-bedroom calculation. So that's something that just really, more than anything else, needs a fix in the near term, because we're seeing 4-bedroom applications come forward. Keep going, Patrick. So, as I mentioned previously, as we look at what the scope of study should be for this effort, it is part of an annual review that is required of the Affordable Dwelling Unit manual, but we are really using this review as an opportunity to focus in on studying and potentially refining expectations for in lieu fee payments broadly, but bonus height projects specifically, and also student housing. So our next steps, are what we're really proposing as the scope of work for this effort, is to try to answer a number of questions through research and analysis. We have hired 3TP to actually help us with this. So they've left the room, but they'll be coming back, I think, at some point to provide a report on their findings on this topic of the in lieu fees and student housing specifically. So they will be, for example, updating the model to include student housing, and so that we can really determine what approach to requirements for an in lieu fee payment provides the best balance of incentivizing production of on-site units without limiting development feasibility. We'll also be looking at whether the current in lieu fee payment structures accurately reflect construction costs and the value gap method that's been proposed. So just some basic kind of fact checking there. What are other Virginia jurisdictions doing? What are the best practices? But then, kind of zooming out, we also want to take time in this study to make sure we have the right understanding of what our goals are, what the guiding principles should be for developing some recommendations. What are the city's goals for student housing? Where do we think it should be located? To the extent that that's something that we have power to control. Should an in lieu fee payment be greater for bonus height than for non-bonus height? So those are all questions that we want to ask through some engagement with key stakeholder groups and broad engagement. You can keep going, Patrick. And so speaking of engagement and stakeholders, certainly want to make sure that our key commissions have an awareness and understanding of the scope of work. We'll be engaging with property owners, with UVA, Albemarle County, TJ, PDC, and advocacy organizations to get their input on, what are the answers to those questions about our goals and guiding principles. We're doing outreach to commissions. Happy to report that we'll be using our new digital engagement platform, Connect Charlottesville, to do some digital outreach that hasn't been as easy for us to do in the past. Just as a side note, Connect Charlottesville is live. It right now is really just focused on a number of ongoing projects in NDS. That has been something that Osea Kinlotan in our long-range planning group has truly led that effort to make that happen for us. So check it out when you have a chance. But this study will be featured in Connect Charlottesville as an opportunity to get to provide feedback. And then we'll do some focus groups and pop-up visits as well with different groups that might be able to give some input. And really the key questions for the community and for stakeholders are, what do you think is the most important outcome for this policy? What should it accomplish for the community? And what are the impacts or unintended consequences that we want to try to avoid? So one set of potential options that we could explore, and a lot of these are simply crosswalks from some of the issues that I identified previously, would be to study the creation of an in lieu fee payment structure that increases the requirement for bonus height to reflect that the on-site requirement for bonus height is 50% of AMI, not 60% of AMI. As it pertains specifically to student housing, consider requiring on-site units for student housing. Just because developers won't build them doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a requirement, especially if there's an option to provide an in lieu fee payment instead. I think that, some advantages of that, of exploring that approach are that it would address the potential for conversions to non-student housing that's been raised as a concern, and also would allow for on-site units, affordable units, when financial market conditions are favorable to that. Add an in-lieu fee requirement for 4-bedroom units, that's kind of a must-do. And then really consider that geographic criteria. Is there still a need, given the potential merit of making the requirement for non-student housing the same as for student housing? Are there other reasons to maintain a geographic boundary for some, other reason? And I think, the merit of this is that it removes that unintended incentive to build student housing. And then for all housing projects, I think, and this is a good tie-in with the tax abatement presentation you just received, consider if there are some strategies to help offset the costs associated with affordable housing production and facilitate investment. And I think there's more to come on that topic. So in terms of our timeline, we have brought the consultant on board to start to do some of that back of the house research, continue to update that model, look at what other jurisdictions are doing, and try to figure out what are the right approaches to help balance sorry, every time I do this. I can't help but thinking about 6-7. Sorry, I just had to.
Oh, I know.
Having kids.
I feel you.
What is, in the next part of this process, we will really do that stakeholder engagement that I mentioned, try to get feedback on guiding principles, and then in the spring, we're hoping to be able to develop some recommendations for policy refinements and amendments as needed. So I think that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Questions?
Well,
Are there any sort of quick tweaks we could do to just get something rolling? I'm concerned that the build cycle is sort of annual, and acting in spring means we're losing another year.
Say that again about this cycle?
So there's generally, you generally want to get your approval done like in the winter or early spring, so you can start construction, then be done before the next winter. Otherwise, you're in for another winter of construction. You're in a bad position. Is there anything we can do to tweak this faster to get something rolling?
Yeah, in terms of developing the big picture policy, I think we want to make sure we take our time to do that so that the recommendations are in line with what the community as a whole really sees as appropriate. But I think we can take that back and think about if there's any little changes that could be made immediately. I think that's a good question to flag.
This is 2026, not 2027, right? For when you're planning to have this wrapped up in a couple months?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, hopefully that's what the presentation said.
It is, just
Okay.
making sure.
Yeah, I mean, we are from yes, that is helpful perspective, that this is a pretty short time frame, all things considered, to try to get something done. Recognizing it's an issue.
It's not really a question, just a thought, because I think this is really important, obviously, in the neighborhoods, especially surrounding UVA, and witnessing the discussions and conflicts between the LV Collective and then the Fifield Project. I feel like the diagram showing the boundary it was just like a parallel line. Maybe in talking to neighborhoods, there's ways to adjust the line based on, often we have like hillsides or train tracks or like maybe bus stops, other ways that we could refine that mapping to be more in line with where neighborhoods see that divide. Because I think what we're seeing is that, Main Street has very different neighborhoods adjacent. And maybe there's some neighborhoods that have more room for student housing that might be outside of that, but has a great, great bus system and great more potential for walking to commercial or whatever it is. So anyway, I'd just be interested in looking at that as a potential place for feedback from neighborhoods.
Yeah, that's helpful, good feedback.
I don't know if I have this fully formed, but, I think the 4-bedroom was a great pickup on your part because you're correct. I think those units, and I think there's 5-bedroom units in some of those developments too. So I think getting ahead of that, I think to Lyle's point about trying to do something quickly, it seems like a smart thing to sort of incorporate. What I was trying to figure out is it seems like we just saw, we were showing how building's tough right now. It seems like some of these loopholes actually are making student housing maybe less difficult to build, and we're seeing it with bricks and mortar going up. I'm curious, is looking at affordability and looking at these new products being offered that are proximate to grounds, that are solely geared really towards a student experience because they're, by a bedroom, not by a unit. And I'm curious about what the sort of the ripples are to existing historic student housing. And should the city put a bullet point on here to cast what incentives can go in some of these historic neighborhoods, these single-family, that once were single-family homes that have been subdivided into student houses? Is there a pathway for those landowners to maybe return those into market rate housing instead of student housing? And, I just wonder if there's some part of this student housing study that sort of looks a broader net, that's not just new development, but it sort of helps restore some communities that, again, were historically single-family homes or multifamily homes and weren't just student properties. I don't know what that is, if it's a tax, again, going back to what we were talking about before, but.
I think, whenever we do a study like this, it always raises additional questions, right? Or areas of study or exploration. So perhaps that is something that could be added, is just simply a note that while we may want to keep the scope of this contained and be able to bring forward recommendations that meet this very specific need, it could flag some areas for additional study in the future. So that's a good example of one, I think.
For my sake, and as well as the public's sake, I think I heard you say a couple times, there's this distinction between the geographical boundary for the in lieu of fee versus the definition of student housing. From my understanding of what you just said, student housing is really just defined as rental by the bedroom, or is there more to it than that?
Well, it's only referred to in the development code as rental by the bedroom and located within a half mile.
Within the boundary?
Within that boundary, yes, excuse me.
It's only connected to the inclusionary zone. It's not, that's the only time.
We don't have a definition for student housing as like a use that's permitted in some areas and not in others.
Yeah, so that's going to be my follow-up question was, you had also said that student housing is permitted citywide.
Right, there's no restriction.
So then the difference really is inside the boundary is what sort of in lieu fee?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the extent of the.
And some of the concerns you've brought up is that potentially that in lieu fee inside the boundary is over incentivizing the creation of student housing versus some other forms of housing.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I don't want to repeat a previous question, but maybe to add to it, again, the previous topic was about the high cost of building in Charlottesville. I think all the changes I'm hearing in this presentation would increase fees. We're adding more fees for higher bedroom counts, which, by the way, makes sense, but the effect is to make the fees higher, given what's being built. Changing the fees for the height bonus units, again, makes sense, but the effect is to raise IZ fees. And then I think maybe the biggest change I heard was, and again, I get the idea to harmonize in lieu fees for student housing and non-student housing, but it sounds like the in lieu fees are much, much higher for non-student housing, like doubling your chart. If you harmonize those by raising student housing in lieu fees to match non-student housing fees, you're talking about doubling them. And that seems really challenging to square with 3TP's previous presentation about how IZ is already a material burden on development such that we have 3 units in the pipeline citywide.
Right.
I think harmonizing by lowering the non-student housing IZ fees to match, in lieu fees to match the student housing fees makes a lot of sense. It lowers costs, and I think the rent gap just makes sense conceptually in a way that construction costs, I don't personally get why that would be the model, But I would like to hear more about how do we square, we want to make development more feasible with every knob we're turning makes development cost more under this plan, if I'm reading it right, which maybe I'm not.
Yeah, just a clarification there. I don't think we know yet that it would be appropriate to bring the requirement for student housing up to the same level as what is currently required for non-student housing, nor that the current expectation for non-student housing is appropriate either. So maybe that's something I can clarify in this presentation, but we will be looking at the in lieu fee expectations for both student housing and non-student housing to see if it is providing the right balance of promoting the provision of on-site units and still supporting the production of housing, period. So we will look at both of those questions, and we just don't know yet. But another point to make is that I think a key question that we will be trying to raise through our engagement is, what are we trying to do here exactly with these in lieu fee expectations? Are we trying to, increase revenue for uses elsewhere? Are we trying to promote the production of on-site units, or, so I think they're all still really open questions that we're planning to look at through this study.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, what I'm hearing you say is that the possibility of harmonizing student housing and non-student housing in lieu fees might look like raising student fees to meet non-student or lowering non-student to meet student, and those are both on the table.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I assume we'll have the chance to weigh in on in the engagement port of the stakeholder engagement that looked like on the timeline was February or something. So I guess, will we have a chance, a work session or something to give feedback to the study team?
There will definitely be opportunities for additional engagement and to weigh in, yes, on the guiding principles and the goals, for sure.
Right. Great.
Yeah.
Any others? All right. Oh,
Sorry.
go ahead.
I don't have time to restudy it because I don't look at this very often and it's long. But the affordable housing plan is the best guide that I have on those topics of what are we doing and why are we doing it. It's not terribly specific in some areas, which can create challenges for us and has.
Right.
But that's what I have today.
Yep, that's a good reminder. We do have some comp plan guidance to help us know how to move forward. All right.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we have matters presented by the public, not on the formal agenda. So the zoning code text amendments will be a public hearing, so there will be a time to speak to that. But if anybody in the audience or online wants to say anything that is not related to the zoning code text amendments, now would be the time. Dana, can you moderate that?
Sure. So if you'd like to speak in matters for the public, you may step forward. Please provide your name. If you're online, you can press the raise hand icon and I will call your name out so you can speak. And you have 3 minutes.
Hi, Jeff Levine again. Tonight's very interesting because what's laid out to you, and you're really tuning into it, the development community, the people who go into business to do this, they follow A, the path of less resistance, and B, how they get an economic return on their risk and their capital. If you look at just everything that's been laid out, the structure is to build affordable housing or maybe hospitality. Actually, one of my sites, I pivoted from residential to hospitality because the economics didn't work. So things can work. If you make the in lieu payment so high, but you combine it with a real estate tax abatement that's given if we build affordable housing, and the math works, we'll be more inclined to build affordable housing because the math works. I will tell you that almost in every instance, it probably pays to pay the payment in lieu because you have no burden of that low-cost housing that you basically have to give away, and you can finance that in lieu thing. And that's, I want to talk to Jeremy about that in his model. because his model always contemplates that you're building these and you're getting less revenue, which drags it down, and so you need this tax abatement. There are ways, what I'm saying is to put these together, and I don't know if every department head is thinking collectively, because also our code is meant to have density and to go tall where you get the most bang for your buck. If you can use a half acre or an acre parcel to build 300 units versus 12 acres building only 3 stories, that's where you get the best bang for your buck. But our code, I'm not supposed to talk about the code, but if you help the economics for larger projects, high-rise projects to give you the most bang for your buck, that helps. And if this amorphous thing, not called the code, worked in a way that actually worked for an urban setting and wasn't laid out for basically green space, because I'm going through it now where the code is just very difficult to navigate for urban sites that are made for the most density. If everybody spoke together about what everybody wants, and what I constantly hear is the city wants housing. They want affordable housing, market rate housing. And what we've heard tonight, none of that is being built. Student housing is being built, some hospitality is being built, and you had a great point. The thought of raising any fee and anything that makes this more complex, which are that thing out there called the code, has made this even more complex to go through site plan approval and everything, and adding time. We're not together, the private public sector and all the public heads, on looking to get what we want. Right now, there's this vision of encouraging development, and everything in place does not do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I see no additional speakers and no raised hands online.
All right.
And just shut up.
Oh,
Okay.
Valerie Long, you may speak now.
Thank you very much. Good evening, commissioners and staff. This is Valerie Long. I'm at Williams-Mullen. I enjoyed watching the reports this evening and appreciate the thoughtful comments that have been provided. I wanted to just provide some comment to the most recent discussion you just had about the fee and lieu rates for affordables or for student housing relative to non-student housing, and the perception that it creates an incentive for student housing to locate in certain areas so they can take advantage of the lower fees. In our experience, and we work with a lot of the large national student housing developers, find that they are focused almost entirely on location, finding a location that is strategic for their market, finding a willing seller, and finding a seller who will work with them on a price that actually pencils. Most of the time, by the time they find us and we're talking to them, they've heard, oh, there's some sort of affordable housing requirement. We don't know what it is. Usually they assume it's a requirement for a certain number of affordable units. We spend a fair amount of time educating them on all of the types of things that Director Brown discussed today about the differences for fee and lieu, where you can do units, where you can't do units, and what the different schedules are and why they're different and how it works and why is there not a 4-bedroom option and all those things. They don't know any of that information. They certainly factor it into their budget and their purchase price, but they don't start by looking at where can we go and develop student housing in the city and pay the least amount of money for our fee and lieu. That is definitely an afterthought. It is obviously an important figure, but they don't start there. They're focusing on location. Thank you.
Thank you.
See, James Snyder has a raised hand. James, you can unmute now.
Yes, my name is James Snyder. I have a home at 206B 5th Street Southwest. It's one of 6 units on a third of an acre called Oak Lawn Cottages. Across the street are another 6 units on a third of an acre called Oak Grove Cottages. And next door to us is a 3-story condominium flat called 5th Street Flats. These were all built 20 years ago by a local developer and a local architect, and they define what you're trying to get through your missing middle effort. Unfortunately, they, along with some historic homes on Fifth Street, have been rezoned to RX5, 7 stories. They are damaging our property because with no setbacks, someone can come in and build student housing right next to our property line. And we have been asking since June to get this fixed. We are the poster child of what you're trying to get done. Together, we have more units by several times built that define missing middle than you're getting built through all this time and effort out in the neighborhoods. We have requested and had no response to how can we get our zoning fixed. It's going to create hardship on us. It's going to create disinvestment. It damages our property by removing any setbacks requirement. You have 100-year-old homes which are historic or contributing on Fifth Street, which are now zoned for 7 stories. We're right next to the railroad tracks, and you also have very high-density, tall buildings being built next to the railroad tracks. You may not know this, but the state of Virginia hopes to include a passenger line from Charlottesville towards Richmond and further east. These developments being built right on the property lines are going to make that eventual improvement to the Charlottesville station impossible. And the city has not coordinated with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, which is a state agency that owns the property. They really don't know anything about what you're doing. There's some serious things that need to be looked at here. And while we're talking about bits and pieces and studies and more consultants, some basic things like rezoning us back to what we should be so we can help show off what missing middle can be in terms of scale and livability. Instead, we've been punished with this out of the blue 7 stories RX5 zoning. We've been talking, we've been at meetings, we've had no formal response from the staff. We've heard on occasion from the council, the planning commission, the board of architecture review concerns about, well, that's terrible, we're going to take care of it. I've heard no outrage tonight from the commission. This is a problem that needs to be solved. Otherwise, you're going to have people building this stuff, and you're going to condemn the city to not be able to ever get that passenger rail thing done. Right now, it takes 5.5 hours to get to Richmond from Charlottesville, because you have to go to Alexandria and then down to Richmond.
All right, thank you, Mr. Snyder.
I have 17 seconds left.
You're done, but I think we can help you out a little bit. Matt or anyone else on staff, there is a method, correct, for a rezoning, for a private property owner to do rezoning. Is there a method for a collection of property owners to file a rezoning?
A rezoning can be pursued by any property owner for their property.
Mm-hmm.
There is a process. Staff is always happy to help with that process.
Okay.
You know, it's not necessarily done as a collective, but you would do it for your property. You know, you can come forward as a group for each, you know, one of the properties you own.
Okay. So I don't know if you heard that, Mr. Snyder, but there's a process that you could go through if you wanted to rezone your property, if rather than waiting for council or anyone else to do it for you. It sounds like you could do it yourself or as a group. So hopefully that helps. Any other online individuals or? Oh, yes, please.
Hi, I'm a third-year student at UVA, and I live at Lambeth 474 student dormitory, and I'm very excited for the Tier 3 amendments, and I think the city is focusing its energy on the right directions and starting to address some of the problems the public is talking about a lot in the past months. And I'm wondering about the communication the city has with the private actors or developers within Charlottesville and Albemarle, because I remember a few months back when the Tier 1, Tier 2 zoning text amendments are starting, there were a lot of energy and enthusiasm from developers about communicating and working with the city on working out specific solutions on Tier 3 and amendments and having ideas on how to make development more feasible with the city. And I'm wondering if there's been movement on that front, or will there be any discussion held in the near future? Because I feel like developers themselves, of course, want to develop and want to make money, and also, of course, want to bring positive impact to the city itself. And they themselves have worked out the financials more than the city probably has. So it'd be wise to get their opinions pretty early on and just get thoughts on that as this Tier 3 process is also going on. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Kim Powell. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for City Schools, and there was a mention about ripple effects with the high-rise student development. I just want to make sure that this body's aware that we do have recent precedent for a significant ripple effect with public school enrollment that occurred between 2010 and 2017, 2018, where we were one of the after decades of no growth in our public schools, we actually had year-over-year growth of 3 to 8%. And it was when the new high-rise UVA student housing opened up on West Main, it freed up single-family home stock in the city in a way that hadn't been seen in a very long time. So you will see likely that opportunity with this next wave of, or this next push for high-rise student development. What happens, of course, as those parcels free up, well, that's some of the issues you're wrestling with, because it'll all depend on how quickly developers scoop that up for more UVA student housing, or whether it goes towards single-family homes. But we'll be watching all this keenly from the public schools.
Interesting. Okay. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, now I do not see any raising.
All right, so our next item is to go into the zoning text amendments. Does anybody need a break before we jump into that? You? All right, can we take it's 7:25 now. Can we try and reconvene about 7:30?
Yep.
We didn't. He's spoken before, I'm not sure that helps. Usually I don't do that. See, because you guys scolded me about the address thing last time, I didn't even know. I don't know why the plan commission meeting and stuff and BAR is so different. It is so weird. Okay. We're all back, right? Yeah, okay. Take it away.
Hi, Chair, Planning Commission, new Planning Commissioners, welcome. I'm Matt Alfley, I'm the Development Planning Manager at NDS. And tonight you're going to be holding a public hearing related to a series of Development Code amendments and making a recommendation to City Council. Next slide. You have seen a few of these slides before in previous meetings. What you see here is the background of the Development Code, the approach to moving minor amendments forwards, and next steps. As I've stated in the past, the best way to think about this tiered approach is the car analogy. I'm kind of the boring guy. I know when we talk about amendments, we're all geared up for the tier 3, but think about the car analogy. Tier 1 is washing the car. Tier 2 is changing the oil, rotating the tires. Tier 3 is the car's making an awful noise and it needs a new transmission. And so what we're looking at tonight is moving those Tier 1 and Tier 2 amendments forward. Next slide. In your packet, you have a full outline of the Tier 1 amendments, but for general purposes, there are 63 amendments that we're proposing to move forward. These are addressing copying, editings, scrivener errors, legislative updates, and small changes. Next slide. As I said in your packet, the full list of all amendments are available, but in this presentation, you just see some examples of those Tier 1 amendments. Next slide. In addition to the legislative amendments we need to make to conform to changes in state regulations that happened on July 1st of this year. Next slide. And here we see the Tier 2 amendments and where staff is recommending 23 changes to the code. The purpose, again, is not to alter the intent sections of the code. This is to provide clarity, to remove some misunderstandings, and just to provide small changes that do not require much in the way of community engagement outside of the public hearing we're having here tonight. That is another distinction when thinking about Tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 and Tier 2, really the public engagement should be happening here at a public hearing. Anything that's Tier 3 really needs to be a robust community engagement where we're hearing from the community and making the changes that are coming from our fellow residents. Next slide are some examples of these Tier 2s. Again, the full changes are in your packet with the full analysis with them. So next slide. The process is to how we got here tonight has been an ongoing effort, one with many different touch points. Staff has been continuously collecting data on these issues and keeping track of them in the working document, which is attachment C in your packet this evening. In addition, we have had a number of work sessions with this body to improve and refine the amendments that you are holding a public hearing on tonight. Next slide. At the most recent Planning Commission work session held on November 12th, feedback was provided to staff on the proposed Tier 2 amendments. Most of Planning Commission's recommendations were incorporated into what you're seeing here tonight, but there were a few areas that came up that staff did make changes to, and I wanted to make sure they were covered so you could see staff's, what we heard from Planning Commission and how we addressed it. The first being the existing structure date. There was talk at that meeting of having a rolling date to allow structures that have been built for the next period of time to count toward that existing structure preservation bonus. The commissioner is worried that a fixed date might exclude new units from qualifying from the existing structure bonus. And after reviewing it, staff was concerned that having a rolling date could create loopholes and would really need an engagement with the community if you wanted to go that route, because even though it may feel arbitrary that that December 18th date, might feel arbitrary, but there is definitely a decision was made as a community that structures before that date had a significance, and we want to preserve them. Definitely when you get into your conversation, I can get into some of the loopholes staff would be worried about with a rolling date. And so that's why we're still at least recommending having a fixed date. It's definitely something we could come back to and review in the future, but at least it would clear up the issue we have right now, which is there is no date. And so if something got a CO, it can be viewed as existing structure the next day. The next was the side setbacks for attached dwelling units. Staff had kind of presented a alternate form. There was a lot of good constructive conversation in the work session. We went back and looked at it again and came up with, we felt, a better solution by just putting the attached side and detached side in each zoning district, and then having the definition covering that it has to be for the project, and that would help hopefully alleviate the concern that someone would just not build one half of the attached dwelling. And then finally, the last one, next slide, was the fence and walls. Staff's original suggestion was to define, have a different definition of fence. There's a lot of good debate and conversation on that at the work session between the 6 feet and the 4 feet. Staff took that information back and reworked it to allow more of an exemption section within fences and walls. And we went with 4.5 to get a little wiggle room for posts when you're talking about 4 feet is what the commission talked about at the work session. And that would give at least room to have posts and then have those 4-foot panels. It also has the exception for when it's required for health and safety under the building code, and when it's required for separation to state agencies such as ABC. Next slide. So you'll hold your public hearing. Staff recommends you approval on these, but you'll have your public hearing and your conversation. And then next steps will be taking these to City Council. With that, I'd like to say that I'm here with my staff, which I want to give a big thank you to. This has been a big push for them over the last 8 months. So I really appreciate their efforts in all that they've done, but we are here to answer clarifying questions so then you can roll into your public hearing.
All right. So yeah, just questions, and then I'm gonna let the public talk. So any questions from the commission?
I have one question. I remember the discussion we had about side setbacks for allowing attached dwellings, and so the wording would basically say if it's one project, you're building 2 attached units, the 0 side setback applies where they're attached in the single project. Does that mean, does a project mean that both units or all units are being constructed at once, or is there still the possibility that you could build one and then come back 2 years later and build the second?
You could, but the project means that's part of it. You're planning to build 4 units. Now, you may phase it and say, I'm building 4 units in 4 phases, but at least it's still documented and it's still part of a plan.
Got it. Okay. That's kind of what I was hoping. So.
And that's why we added in project instead of just the districts.
Okay, very good.
Well, any other questions? Little question, I think, may not be an issue. So I apologize if you explained this last time, the needing a building permit for something over 256 square feet. We're getting rid of that requirement because the building code doesn't require a permit for something smaller than 256 square feet? Is that why we're doing that? Sorry, it's, let me get back to where it is. This is B.5. We've crossed out, our permit is required for accessory use or structures exceeding 256 square feet of gross floor area. So the implication is that you need a building permit for like a doghouse or something, but I'm assuming the building code doesn't
Correct. What we're saying is if it doesn't need a building permit, you still have to follow the rules, but we're not going to make you go through that whole development process for your doghouse. It's very similar to, there's a lot of things that we're basically held to complaint driven. Like, you know, you should come talk to us, you know, but if you don't do it, you could get a citation.
Okay. Okay. So generally, someone adding like going to Lowe's and buying a prefab shed to put in their backyard, you guys are never going to see it, unless someone complains.
No, it'd be kind of if somebody bought that shed and put it in their front yard.
Yeah.
We would want, this kind of gets to that conversation too we had in the work session where we originally were saying we didn't want maybe accessory structures in the front yard. But if we're allowing accessory structures kind of anywhere, we at least want what's in that facade range to match all of our development standards, which that's one, this code is very much a form-based code, even though our last code was somewhat. This really is not so much about the use, whether that's a doghouse or a shed in the front yard. It is a structure, and the structure has design elements that it needs to have. It's going to be in that area.
Okay. Other questions? No. All right. I guess, is there any public comment on this issue?
It looks pretty good, the edits. The code itself is still kind of a mystery to me as to exactly how it works, but all the edits from the work session, I remember a few months ago, looked pretty good and reasonable.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Can I get your name for the record?
Oh yeah, I forgot to say it the first time. Joe Liang, third-year urban planning and econ student, 474 Lambeth Fieldhouse.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone online?
On speakers, you can click the raise hand icon if you'd like to speak. Mr. Chair, I see no raised hands.
All right. Comments, guys. I've got a little collection of them, but I'm going to save them. So, anybody want to go first? Okay. So I get to be the bad guy tonight. All right. I'm gonna be nice. I swear. I'm gonna try. So my concern is that we've got, we talk about some of these things we can get around with a special exception process, but that special exception process is lengthy and expensive. And I don't know if there's some way that some of these things seem so small that is there another way to make them go faster and not cost as much? For example, exceptions to setbacks and build-to zones. I understand that's the same exception process. It's $1,800, and you've got, it looks like, Matt, you told me it was 4 to 5 months. Yeah, so.
Correct.
And I wonder what happens when, you've got a project in front of the BAR and they want to, push something back a little bit. It sounds like we're holding up the project 4 to 5 months. Does this special exception process have to happen if you've got, for that streetscape exemption? So when you've got an easement in your front yard, and there's a opportunity to ask the administrator whether your setbacks can be moved back the amount of that easement, is that the same?
No, if it's administrative, that's happening during the review.
Okay.
So that would happen just in the cycle of the review. You would not need to go to anything that's administrative. You would need to go to city council.
Okay. All right, so this is generally just, well, all right, anybody else who wants to have some sort of variation to that, that front yard setback, it's a 4 to 5 month, okay. That's a concern. I don't know if there's, I'd feel so much more comfortable with some of these things if there was a way to speed that up somehow. Because I feel like that's the type of thing where there may be a better project and we're not getting the better project because waiting 4 to 5 months is too much of a risk.
Chair, could you explain, I mean, when you're talking about that, like, I mean, right now, someone would have to go through that process to change, like, the setback. Is your concern, could you just expand on that concern? I guess because I'm not following for the codes, at least.
Yeah, I guess it's, I'm trying to think of a good example, but I mean, it's, you know, I'm not sure why somebody would want to push their building back further, but maybe they have a use that they want to put in the front yard, like they want to have I think we had somebody had tested the site where that apartment building that no one likes, that's the apartment building is causing so much controversy by West Haven, that site. Mitchell Matthews had come into the BAR to test that right before we adopted the zoning code, and they were going to put a hotel there, and they wanted to have a outdoor dining area out in front, and that would have required a deeper setback. And I think everyone on the BAR agreed, this is fantastic, this would make a better project, but that project would have had to go through the whole special exception process. Now, something that large, I don't feel like that's such a big deal, as much a big deal as, I don't know if there's smaller projects, this might really put a wrench in things.
I think, and this probably is not going to be very helpful to this conversation, but I think it is, as part of these amendments going through, you see that we're making some changes to our development review process. And then there are some things we've been working on in-house for a while that are just on that process-wise. We would like to get those in place. It's changing the development, major and minor development plan to just a development plan and having a major and minor site plan. I think as we get through this round, we could explore something more, trying to scale up or down special exceptions. So it might not be something for right now, but that could be something that would be a path that we could explore on the development review side. Again, how do we remove barriers? How do we speed things up? And it might not be a code thing, but just a scaling special exceptions. Because yes, if someone is building a 12-story apartment building and they have a set of special exceptions they want to move forward, yes, that probably needs to be a little bit more onerous in time to go through. Not too bad, but if somebody is just trying to put a building in their backyard off of East High Street, a process that could be quicker.
And I think that actually, it's the element workshop is kind of where I keep coming back to. It just felt kind of ridiculous how we ended up there. And that's another thing is I'm wondering if, let's see, we've got the code allows you to add on to the back of an existing building without having to build within the build to zone. But it doesn't let you put a separate building in the backyard without doing so. And that seems strange.
Well, this is more of a policy thing. So this is, the code is definitely speaking to about bringing things up to the street.
Yes.
That is a fundamental part of the code, is to build this more urban where you're bringing things up to the street. So where we landed is to at least have a relief valve for supporting structures, not the primary structure. We felt the primary structure, if you're going to do an addition, it's fine, but that primary structure needs to be up to the street before you build a next primary structure. But we, at least in these amendments, it's giving a relief valve that it didn't have before, where you couldn't do any structures. This is saying I don't need to bring that primary structure up into the build to zone to add accessory structures to the site. This is the kind of the element example, but also the Bodos on Emmett example.
And I guess my concern is that a dwelling unit cannot be considered an accessory structure. And I wonder about the examples where you've got a single family house and they want to have another dwelling unit somewhere on the property. And I know you've got, in the R zones, it sounds like there's an exception for that with the existing building preservation bonus provision. But I mean, we've got a lot of houses and historic buildings that are in, like High Street is in the CX3 zone. And a lot of those old houses are well beyond the build to zone. And I guess, you know, a way around that is somebody could add onto the back of them and physically attach to the back of them, but it just seems silly that you're physically attaching versus building behind. You're getting the same thing. By forcing them to attach to the existing building, you're starting to might be requiring sprinklers being added to the whole building, or some other things that just would drive up the cost of the project.
And I will say that, I didn't say this in my presentation, but I think y'all are aware, this is going to be yearly, once we wrap up.
I know.
Once I wrap up this, we're jumping into 2026 with lessons learned and
Okay.
try to move things quicker. One of the suggestions, and I shared with you, Chair, you know, maybe we look at this in 2026. I'd be a little hesitant of blanketing all the districts, but using this example of the preservation, if it was contributing structures, were deemed to meet Bill 2, that might be some. But I guess my thought is that this would be a little bit more of a fundamental change, because the code is speaking about getting to the street.
Okay.
And not saying it's pro or con, but I think that is the conversation we should be having more with our communities, because that is a fundamental change.
Okay.
I do have something to that.
Okay.
So I was heavily involved with the construction of the sort of the theory of the zoning. And our thought at that time was that the special exception process would be relatively fast and easy. That it would be a speedy and effective process. It would not be like a special use permit. It would not go to council. It would just go to the planning commission, focus on, you know, just the specific issues at hand, and dispense with it efficiently for the good of the public. That's against the law. We have since learned. No, everything goes to council. If it's a special exception, it must by law go to council. That changed, I think, in 2016, which was before my time. It's not my fault. But we are bound by law to be more thorough and public with these decisions, which we weren't calculating when we wrote these. So that may be a thought as we have learned that the process is more burdensome. That may inform how we're thinking about this process.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, ideally, it would be like that, where it'd be like going to the BAR. You know, it's a 1 month, 30 days, and a small fee, and, you know, get some consensus and move on, but I guess that's not gonna happen. But yeah, so again, it's the same thing with, if we need a special exception for the active depth, I'm still really stuck on the definition of active depth. I mean, I don't know who, I guess, is there a free administrative, this is a bad hallway, this is a good hallway type thing? Or this is a tiny little bathroom that's part of a residence, it doesn't count, versus this is a multi-user bathroom that's not allowed in this area? I mean, how does that get resolved?
So under how it's currently written, it's really prescriptive. There's no administrative.
Well, it's written that it's as defined by the administrator or something, is in the wording. I think that's what you added.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm saying what's existing now, there is no administrative.
So with the modification you guys made, how is that with any project that someone's got, because any office project is gonna have, or if you've got a building, okay, you have a project in a DX zone, I think it's a 30-foot active depth on the front facade, which I believe goes up the whole front facade. Someone puts I guess they just have to come with their plans and say, I've got this many little closets in these offices, and there's a corridor here, but it's part of the office, and it's not a major circulation corridor. Is it just an informal review, or is that?
So what I will say is, again, one of the trade-offs, a form-based code is meant to be allow more freedom, not about use, it's about form, but it does require an applicant to have their ducks in a row a little earlier in the process, so that we can determine they are complying with the development code early in the process. And so we are trying to be sensitive to not needing architectural drawings that early, but they've got to show us something that they meet these active depths. So This is building in a little more flexibility. I think we would be consistent on how we use that flexibility. But if the body, if there was a better definition, we definitely would entertain that.
Well, I guess, so I'm wondering if someone builds apartments, there's gonna be bathrooms and hallways and closets and all that within the 30 feet of active depth that's in a DX zone. And I hope I'm not misquoting. I believe that's how the DX is defined, is that the front facade has to be 30 feet ground floor to the roof. Please correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm making something out of nothing. But if someone puts an apartment there, that's not by definition possible. So I don't, I'm assuming that by reading this, I'm hoping that when it says, as determined by the administrator, that the administrator will look at that and say, oh, these are all components of an apartment, so it's allowed within that 30 feet. But the way it's written, I'm worried that it may not be like that, and
When we wrote this, we were trying to give more flexibility to the administrator, but unfortunately, when you get into the actual section on active depth, it actually has these things like hallways, restrooms, called out differently. So I would have preferred to take them out of the definition, but because they're so tied into the code, is why they're still in the definition. Yeah, it's the wall, it's the fence and wall fiasco where it's so integrated into it.
I mean, this is one of those things that I feel like it's a major problem, or could be a major problem, depending on how it gets interpreted, that if this means another 2 weeks of kind of looking through the code for stuff, but if you're telling me it's going to be another year, then...
I think I don't know if we'd have time to fix that section of the code to match. I'm less concerned because the projects that this would really impact, what we're seeing is they are probably going to be coming forward with special exceptions.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I mean, we haven't had large projects, someone come forward to us and say, I'm doing this 100% by right. I'd love that. I'd love not to see y'all. But the reality is just, we're running into it with our topography, where we're seeing some of the active depth really on the front end becoming an issue because you're dropping down, and your plates, aren't lining up, and people aren't wanting to do the modular, and so they're, talking about coming to do special exceptions because they have exposed wall.
All right, I'm gonna go for an easy one at this point. I love the changes to fences and guardrails. The one thing I noticed is that for bullet point A, you say that it does not have a solid foundation. And I could imagine someone could build a masonry wall that would have a solid foundation. I don't know that you even have to have that line about...
Well, because the code is split into walls and fences. And so there's a whole list of requirements when you get into foundation is a wall.
Okay.
And so we kept that in place because that actually is more permanent, so it gives a little more discretion to city council if they wanted to do a special use. But walls are allowed in a lot of areas per district.
Okay, so there's a difference between someone building a brick wall that's 4 feet high versus a wood picket fence that's okay.
Yeah, the code breaks it up into walls and fences. And so we didn't touch the walls because that really hasn't been an issue. It's been the fences have been an issue.
Okay. All right, I guess solid foundation is, that feels a little fuzzy, but I guess it's, all right. I'm trying to think if there's gonna be, if a fence, I guess they've got a little concrete, might have little concrete piers or something, but that's something different, right?
Yeah, it's, I think the pillars would be fine. It's
okay.
there.
Okay. Let me just make sure I didn't miss something. Anybody have anything else?
I'll just add, Carl, I think I'll add to what you're saying. I share your concerns about the active depth going all the way up to the roof, and I feel like after however many hours our work session was, and we were all tired. We were like, why do we have, we're starting to be like, why do we have this, the build to requirement? Like, we want you to preserve the structure, but then we say, oh, but it's not to the build to, and this would make it harder for you to preserve the structure. And I hope, and right now I can't remember if some of these things are in tier 3 or not, but I think I agree, these things are like longer term, more substantial changes to the code, and I would be on board for taking a look at these things and, outside of what we're doing tonight, discuss a more substantial change in the future.
And I will say that, what we are hoping as we roll into the 2026 amendments, I am hoping it is not 60-something and 20-something. I hope we can really pare it down, that we, Planning Commission as a body can work on, and it's maybe like 4 or something a little more manageable to dig into deeper. But again, our tweaks, not changing the intent of the code, and so they really can, again, be this as the public engagement.
But, yeah, I do hope that for next year, we do actually tackle some philosophical issues in this, because I think we've got some disagreement between the commission and staff as to, and maybe I'm speaking for you guys out of turn, but it seemed like from our work session that we definitely had some philosophical differences that we'd like to study at least. And I'm content if we have a work session every month that includes going through this stuff, if that's what we have to do to get this right. I'm sure you guys don't want that, but it's, anyways. Well, I guess I don't have anything to change since you guys have told me I can't, so.
If someone made a motion, they could make changes if they were needed.
We have a motion.
Can I ask a question? I'm not going to make a
Yes.
motion. I'm not allowed yet. Are there, and this is purely procedural, I have no opinions about the content yet. Are there topics in tier 2 that people on the commission want to see pulled into tier 3 to talk about more? Is that what you're describing?
I think the issue is that we want to make changes as fast as we can, and there are changes we want to make in tier 2 that we can't make them in tier 2, but they need to wait for tier 3. So we keep trying to grasp at tier 3 items and pull them into tier 2, and we're getting told not to, for good reason. It needs more public comment and study. That makes sense. Okay. For a motion, can we include some comments to council of like, we would love to see these certain things change in the future?
I don't know if you necessarily need them in the motion. When we do our city action memo, we recap this meeting. If there's certain highlights that you want to make sure are captured, we will definitely include that. It's just the motion, when we go to city council, it's just we say planning commission recommended, or recommended denial, recommended approval. So if there's certain things you want city council to be aware of, I'll make sure to capture them and put them in the memo that talks about this meeting.
I guess one of the nice things is if it goes in the motion, there's an understanding as to whether it's kind of a unanimous feeling amongst the planning commission. I don't know if we can pull that off or not, but.
Do you mean things like the philosophy of having less special exemptions and fees, and like just that idea of making things easier to do when each site is so very different? I think that's the thing. We live in a very hilly place. There's not a really neighborhood that looks like another, in terms of setbacks. So I would be on board with some kind of statement where that needs to be addressed over time, if it's,
Yeah, if the commission wants to, I guess, put it in the motion, they can put it in the motion and, we can work on the wording as you.
Yeah.
But,
yeah,
yes.
the idea that we know that there's still problems getting things built due to the rigidity
I guess what I would say though is I still would put them in the memo because the motion isn't included.
Okay.
But, so you can do it in the
Okay.
motion, but I would want to make sure I'm including your thoughts in the memo to read.
Well, then maybe we do our motion and then we'll just have another additional set of comments that we can tack on for you. Kind of summarize any ramblings that are coming from up here.
Well, yeah, I mean, just so they know what y'all are feeling is important.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Please do.
Based on a finding that the proposed zoning text amendments will serve the public necessity, convenience, general welfare, and good zoning practice, I move to recommend approval of the batch of zoning text amendments as proposed by staff within this report.
Seconds.
I'll second.
Dan, can you call a vote?
Commissioner Sully Yates,
Aye.
Commissioner Harness,
Abstain.
Commissioner Carp,
Abstained.
Commissioner Yoder,
Yes.
Commissioner Rooker,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Chairman Schwartz.
Yes. All right. So, potential thoughts for commentary. I think one of the things I'd like to add is a serious look as to whether we want to maintain build-to zones as opposed to just having minimum setbacks. A redefinition of active depth, and maybe even a consideration as to whether we need active depth. And I guess a concern over the ability to add onto existing properties without having to build in front of them. Or add additional uses, additional buildings on existing properties without having to build in front of the existing structures.
Yeah, I think, could you like build that into the not the active depth, the build to, like, I think the build
It's
to.
related, yeah.
It's like, we wanna reevaluate the build to, how it works and whether we should add it.
Yes, so maybe reevaluating the build-to zones in reference to existing buildings, existing structures.
Gotcha, yeah.
So, in an effort to preserve our existing buildings.
Could we exempt existing structures from the build-to requirements?
I think that would be an idea.
That-
I think that would be a very possible idea. I'd ask the question as to whether the BAR could, or any building in a design control district or IPP could be exempt, or any construction in those districts. So I mean, that's just another rabbit hole that we could possibly go down. But I think in general, the idea would be, how do we just an investigation of the build-to zones with an eye to preserving our existing buildings. Is there that general okay?
I agree, yeah.
Any other things that anybody has wants to add to this?
I'll just say that my general philosophy here is to do exactly what you're asking for. I think you're asking for a little bit of consensus from us, even outside the motion, as to what we're sort of pushing toward council. And as a new member here, I do just want to say that my general philosophy is to ease the burden that some of this stuff puts on developers. You brought up some good points here. 3 or 4 or 5 months doesn't seem like a long time in the general scheme of things, but it really does have an impact when you're thinking about building and people potentially taking out loans, and there's real monetary and feasibility impacts that come from that. So my general philosophy while I'm up here is to try to ease some of those burdens, from whether it's a homeowner wanting to add an addition or an ADU or anything else, all the way up to your professional developer.
All right. Any further comments? We don't have Phil anymore. I didn't look up what the event of the day was.
Yeah, we should have
No.
him call in.
Mr. Chair, I have some questions for staff, if I may.
Yes, please.
Question about the land bank. We've been busy with other matters. What is the status of the land bank ordinance?
Okay, hello. So the land question of whether or not to create a land bank was a question posed, well, it's been a topic of consideration, I think, for many years. It was a topic of consideration for the Housing Advisory Commission last year, and a number of recommendations were being studied by staff. Through discussion with the HAC, the decision was made to kind of put a pause on looking at the land bank for the time being. There were a number of considerations related to that recommendation, but that's kind of where things are at the moment. And not to say it's not something that would ever come back as a potential opportunity, but I think we're focused right now at looking more closely at the tax abatements, tax abatement as a potential strategy, and a number of other priorities for housing staff in NDS right now.
Thank you. I had a call today with a school board member, and we heard from a city schools employee tonight, both sort of singing the same song about better collaboration between the school board and the Charlottesville Planning Commission. It's an issue very close to my heart. I shared some ideas, but I just wanted to flag the issue that school board members want to work with us and do better work together. So I'd like us to think about that issue.
Definitely.
Would anybody like to adjourn us?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion. I move to adjourn.
I will second that. Let's adjourn. Good night, everyone.